Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome on behalf of Exemplar Global and Psychological Consultancy. My name is Edward Balfour, and I am the sales manager for Exemplar. And very shortly, we'll be introducing Geoff Trickey, who's going to talk today about risk and particularly the nature of risk of auditors and auditing, which is obviously a very topical subject for us at the moment. Now, we've muted the audio just to ensure that we have a better experience for all of us. We've got a large number of people. We've had a great response to this event, which we're very pleased about. But we do invite you, please, as we go through, as Geoff goes through, to raise questions via the chat function that you have on screen, and Grace from Psychological Consultancy will be addressing questions and answering those questions at the end of the session. We will aim to have everything wrapped up and finished over the next 45 minutes, conscious of the time of day, and just as an offer, there's always an offer with these things. As a follow-on, we will be following up, but we do have an online self-assessment tool which we'll invite you to take up, and we're going to provide you with a small incentive to do that. And for those of you who are existing Exemplar certified auditors, you will be able to claim this webinar, and indeed, if you do the assessment, towards your CPD. So that would be 1 hour for each event, so 2 hours in total. So that's something in it for you to do. Now, for those of you who haven't come across Exemplar before, I do invite you to, after this event, jump on the website if you haven't done so already, and please explore and understand a little bit more about who we are and what we do. My contact details will come up at the end, but I do very much encourage all of us, all of you joining today, to follow on the conversation with Geoff, with ourselves, and so with that, I hope you enjoy the next 40 minutes or so, and like to introduce you now to Geoff Trickey from Psychological Consultancy. Geoff, over to you.
Good morning. Geoff Trickey here, speaking from the UK and the Psychological Consultancy Limited. As a company, we are business psychologists, and I've been running this company now for just about 25 years. Over the past 5 or 6 years, we've worked quite closely with Exemplar Global, who've been shown a lot of interest in the research that we have been doing on today's topic, really, our research into human factors in the risk equation. That led to the sponsoring by Exemplar Global of our major international profession-wide survey of the practitioner's propensity for risk within the auditing profession. And what we were doing, we're exploring, if you like, the implications of risk personality, or the human factor side of the auditing profession's ISO guidelines. So that has been our agenda. As I say, 6 years or more research I'll be trying to cover in the next 30 minutes. So what you're going to get is just clearly the headlines, but I hope it's enough to interest you and to take the matter further. I thought we'd start off with, just in a nutshell, this one screen really gives you pretty much the agenda that we're going to be covering. So the point about auditing is the tasks that you undertake during field work will involve a number of things. Sorry about that. We just flipped the a number of different processes of investigation, observation, interpretation, and so on, as listed on your screen at the moment. Now, the point about all of those functions are they all require, to some degree, personal judgment. Yes, they may be framed in clear structures and procedures and so on, but at the end of the day, there is always an element of personal judgment. And the point about personality and about risk type and about what we have to say today is that this is something within you that influences the way you make those judgments and the way in which you come to those decisions. This is just a couple of quotes from the annual report of the Chief Scientific Advisor in the UK. And I've quoted them here so that you know this isn't just coming from the top of my head. I mean, this is deeply rooted and it's very well established fact. Decision making then draws both on the analytic, which is what you'd expect, but also on the emotional systems of the brain. And to some extent, we will make decisions instinctively. Obviously, that's moderated by the extent that we're in control of the situation and the circumstances we're in. But when push comes to shove, and under pressure particularly, you make decisions in a very instinctive kind of a way. And both of those factors are involved. Now, in auditing and generally in risk management and the assessment of risk, there is a kind of assumption that we're dealing with, that we are able to deal with risk in a really objective way. And it's very easy to say, well, everybody knows what a risk is, fine. But when it comes down to actually defining risk in specific ways, it becomes increasingly difficult, not least because risk applies so broadly into so many situations, it's almost impossible to come up with a brief definition. But you have this illusion of objectivity. The fact is, there's no truly objective way of quantifying risk. There are processes I've alluded to, but there's no really objective way. There's no single metric, for example, that will apply to any kind of risk, whether it's medical risk or if it's motoring and transport risk or whether it's financial risk. There isn't a single metric. What we have to do is to find in each situation, whether you're talking about a very dangerous road or whether you're talking about a dangerous drug, we find arbitrary or fairly ad hoc, convenient ways of measuring that or summarizing the degree of it. So in all of those processes, we do have to rely on judgment. I mean, this is a picture that I've used in many presentations just to sort of think about that for a minute, really. So there's on the screen at the moment, we've got two pictures where people clearly are taking a degree of risk. And in some ways, there's similarities, aren't there? In both pictures, you've got somebody, or height comes into the equation. On the left, you've got somebody who's doing a painting job on the front of that building. And because the ladder isn't long enough, I assume, they've propped it on top of their van in order to make the distance. And that's something that you might worry about on a health and safety basis. But then if you look at the second picture, this is two people equally doing something extremely hazardous, I would say. I mean, that's the only reason people are looking at them. They're looking at them because they're doing something hazardous. Hazard is what it's about. And the question is, which of those really is taking the most risk? The people on the left are day-to-day work. People on the right, well, I guess it's their day-to-day job too, but they're balancing on, the first guy here is on a 10-foot-high motorcycle, and they are actually juggling flaming torches. And they are surrounded by a crowd in a public space with the children being pushed to the front where they can get a good view, as you can see. So we can look at that risk and we can deliberate about who's taking the most risk. But there's also another side to that. We can also look at the people. I think you and I would be very reassured if we knew that the people in the left-hand picture had a great deal of experience in working from a ladder, balancing on the top of a van. That would be reassuring, wouldn't it? And they weren't just a couple of cowboys who'd set up in business a week ago and never climbed the ladder before. That would make a huge difference to how much risk was involved. And that would be even more the case, wouldn't it, with the second picture? The skill and the experience of the people is what we're reassured by, or the assumption that they have skill is what we're reassured by. So The point is, when we have evaluated risk, that's been the focus, the risk itself, and not the people involved in it. And it's the difference between the perceptions, which is also an illustration of subjectivity. So the people watching the motorcyclists are looking at something that they think is very dangerous and extremely difficult. The people actually doing it know that it really isn't. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it in a public space in that sort of a way. So is the focus on the risk or the focus on the person? And I suppose that gets to the heart of what we have to say. Now, I'm going to talk for a brief time now about personality and why it matters, because it's a necessary detour in order to accomplish our task this morning. But we're coming right back to matters more familiar shortly. So bear with me. The point about risk and personality. Okay, well, the first point is that we know a lot about personality. It's an area that is clearly defined. It's been of interest for thousands of years, and over the past couple of hundred years, it's very systematically been researched. And we've reached a point in that where we can speak with great confidence about it. We can measure it very reliably. Personality measures today, the best of them now, because since the internet, there are all kinds of personality measures out there. Some of them very flaky and Mickey Mouse, some of them are really good. The point is too that risk personality is about human nature. It's something about people in general. So it's relevant to everybody, not just in the work situation, but in their day-to-day lives as well. And what we discovered when we set out on this journey was that the domain of personality is absolutely riddled with risk themes. There's a few examples here just to illustrate that point. So on the left here, we've got a few terms that refer to people's willingness to take risks, the factors in their personality that make them more risk-taking. And there's a selection there on the right of the kinds of characteristics that make people more risk-averse. Now, there's the lexicon. It's estimated the number of words in the English language that are related to personality is something over 3,000 words. And most of those have implications of one kind or another for either for risk-taking or for risk aversion. So this, in a way, was our kind of starting point. And of course, that language is there because these things are important to us. We wouldn't have so many terms describing personality and describing particularly risk-taking elements in personality if it wasn't something that was very important to us as a species. The other thing about personality, which is important from our point of view, is that personality remains fairly stable over an adult working life. That's to say, from the point when your brain really becomes mature, which isn't actually until late teens, early 20s. From that point onwards, the measurement of personality shows us globally that it remains at a very stable level right through towards the end of working life. So we're talking there about, say, towards the late 50s, early 60s. There is a trajectory, if you like. People who are very anxious get slightly less anxious, slightly more comfortable in their own skins as they get older, and so on. We understand that too, but it's very consistent. The other point is that personality, the roots of personality are deeply embedded in you physiologically. I mean, and it's something that has a persistent and a consistent influence on you all of the time, day to day. And so there may be many other factors that influence what you do, but this is something that is pulling you in a particular direction, making you the person that you know and other people know. And for all of us, that means we have particular distinctive strengths and we have limitations. So personality then assessment identifies these deeply rooted individual differences. Now, on the other side of that, personality doesn't dictate absolutely what you do. Of course it doesn't. It doesn't choreograph your behavior on a day-to-day basis. You are a sentient being and you have free will. So you do make choices, you do plan your life. The point is, though, you have this inbuilt behavioral bias. It'll pull you back to your natural position. Your risk type, if you like, is where you're anchored. And we illustrate that with this picture, where the boat, if you're looking at it from the shore, is moving around. It's jumping up and down with the waves. It's being pulled in by the tide and blown around by the wind. But it's anchored. So if you look at it for over a short period of time, you won't see anything perhaps very consistent about the way the boat's behaving. If you look at it long enough, you'll realize it's anchored, and you'll realize where the anchor is. So personality is a bit like that. You don't see a person's personality the moment you meet them. Of course you don't, because they're being charming or friendly or whatever they want to be. But over time, when you get to know them, you understand where their anchor is. Okay, now, so that's the background. I want to talk to you now about the outcome of the research that we undertook along these lines. Just to say this research was actually triggered in the UK by the regulatory authorities at the time, who were requiring financial advisors to assess their clients' propensity for taking risk, or their appetite for risk. And the point was, there was no way of doing that was really very sensible or very scientific. And the result of that was an enormous number of checklists of 10, 15, sometimes as few as 4 questions, which would be posed to the client to assess their risk appetite. And one of the wealth managers in the UK, major wealth manager over here, asked us if there was a better way of doing it. And we were frankly surprised that no one was using anything to do with personality at all, although there had been a lot of research suggesting it was the way to go. And so we started from that point. And the rest of this presentation now is explaining where we came to with that research. Our starting point was very similar to that of the Chief Scientific Officer. We had analysed the language of risk, if you liked, in order to build questionnaires around that. And what we discovered were 4 compass points, I guess. 2 of those were about emotions. There were extremes, the 2 extremes on the emotional front relating to risk. So people at one end of a scale which describes them as very fearful, very anxious, very pessimistic, cautious in what they do. And at the other extreme, the other pole, people are calm, optimistic, they hardly register the risk. I liken those to a car which has sensors, parking sensors. So parking sensors are the fearful that go off when you're a long way from the car that you're approaching. With the calm optimist, it doesn't happen until the very last minute. So that's how emotion impacts on risk-taking. The second pair of points on the compass, second 2 poles, excitement seekers. There are people who for whom excitement seeking is their priority. They like life to be interesting, uncertain. They love going into the unknown. And at the other extreme, there are people who won't do anything unless there's a clearly set down a procedure and a process, and everything's thoroughly organized. So that reflects then the emotional and the analytic approaches to risk-taking referred to by the Chief Scientific Officer, and maps onto that very well. And this gave us our original 4 compass points. So there you go. There's 2 scales here, which are the underpinning structure for our assessment. One of them is about how emotional you are, and it goes from the intense risk type, very anxious and fearful, to the composed risk type, almost imperturbable, so calm when everybody else is panicking that they don't seem to realize the risk is there. And then the other scale is much more analytic. It's to do with people at one end who are very systematic, organized, procedural, do things by the process, like everything to be clearly labeled before they set out and do anything. And at the other end of the analytic scale, people who are the absolute opposite. We describe them as carefree. They love to do things impulsively and spontaneously. In fact, if you tell them where they're going on holiday, you'll disappoint them. They want it to be a surprise. They enjoy that situation. Now, the point to make here is you will fall somewhere on the emotional scale. You are somewhere between the intense and the composed risk type. We all are. You are also somewhere between the prudent and the carefree type. We all are. So that creates a situation where you could be both intense and prudent, or you could be carefree and composed. And in order to cover that, we had to introduce 4 more intermediate risk types, which are people who have, for example, 2 reasons for being as fearful or as cautious as or adventurous as they actually are. So if you look at the top then of the model, the wary type have 2 reasons why they are cautious. The first is that they're very anxious and they're very fearful. They worry about things. And the second is because they're prudent, because they don't like to go into anything unknown. They like it to be organized and systematic. So if you were a wary type, you'd be quite passionate about your caution and the systematic way that you feel a risk should be approached. So that would be your standpoint. Now, at the bottom, the people who are adventurous, they have 2 reasons for being adventurous. One is because they're very composed, and that means, say, they have very low antennae for risk in the first place. They don't recognize it there the same with as vigilantly perhaps as the intense would. And at the same time, not only are they composed, they're carefree. So they're spontaneous and impulsive. So adventurous risk type have both those characteristics. And then the same can be said for the excitable. They're both intense and carefree. And the deliberate type is both prudent and composed. So that is our taxonomy of risk type. And this is the graphic that we would use to place any individual assessed within that space. So this particular example is somebody who falls in the deliberate category, but they're not near the edge. So they're not a very strong example of deliberate risk type. They are nearer the axis, and the closer you get to the axis, the milder example you would be of that type. So the compass is divided into these 8 segments, but in reality, it's a 360-degree continuous space. Those terms are just used to help locate and to describe the characteristics of people in that particular area of the compass. Now, when we sample the general population, and we're talking here now about 10,000 individuals who will have completed the risk type compass, we find the prevalence of risk types to be very even. The actual percentages are on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can see they range between 10 to 12, nearly 13%. And those percentages are portrayed accurately within the graphic. You see that's a very even distribution. So you're as likely to be any one of those risk types as any other. And in your workplace, you're likely to encounter other people of different risk types. So that's the reality. In the survey that we did with Exemplar Global, these were the findings for the auditors who participated in that process. And you can see that they predominantly are the deliberate risk type. So these are people who are both they're not fearful, they're not over anxious, but they are very systematic and organized. And there's 3 risk types there that cover about 3/4 of all auditors. So you tend to be deliberate and prudent and composed, which I guess is what you might expect. There are smaller numbers, all the other risk types, everybody is represented there. The least of all is the carefree. The other point you're not getting from that graphic is, of course, that is simply the incidence of risk types. So some of those carefree types might not be so scary as that might suggest, because they could well be quite near the center. So that's the model. Just to summarize that briefly, what we're saying is that decision making always involves a certain amount of judgment. It involves your emotions as well as your reason, and you have a distinctive aspect of your personality which characterizes the bias, which is a part of your decision-making process. So what are the implications for professional development with auditors? Well, here's a series of questions that it'll help you to answer. First of all, which risk type are you? I hope you have to be curious about that. What is your own disposition towards risk? This is something obviously we know and you'll recognize if you complete the assessment. But it's because it articulates it very clearly, you'll understand it better and you'll be more confident in understanding where you actually stand on these things. And because all personality characteristics have advantages, then what are the strengths of your particular risk type? How can you play on those to your advantage? How can you maximize them? What are your potential blind spots? Because are you like the composed type with the antennae that don't pick up the car you're parking near until the last minute? Or are you somebody who can sense risk a long way off? How will your risk type impact on others? What in fact is it in personal relationships and the people that you get on with, the people at work, and professionally the people that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis? How does risk type influence you as an auditor? Now these are important questions for anybody who's involved in risk management because we are a part of the risk equations ourselves. We refer to something as the risk of the risk manager. If you've got a risk manager in an organization, I think it'd be quite interesting to know what risk type they were because their influence is going to be pretty important. Okay, so then what about the risk type of other people? Understanding this spectrum of risk types, it gives you insight into the way other people tick. So what are the risk dispositions of those you deal with? And just as auditors tend to be of a particular risk types, in the same way, so do sales function within an organization. They seem to will have typical risk types. So will the finance department have its own sort of clustering of risk types. And as you move through an organization, the people that you deal with will vary in their risk types, of course, because there are an equal number of all of them. So what would be the relevance to the way you engage and cooperate with them? And then what about the team dynamics? If you're managing a team of your own, what are the dynamics of that team? What is the constitution of the team? How do they play off with each other? And at the biggest stage of all, I guess, is risk culture of an organization. How does risk type play into that? Organizations are made up of teams. So, sorry, before we go on to this slide, the point is that I think there's a lot in the risk type compass which is about personal development, self-awareness as an auditor, and giving yourself a way of appraising where your weaknesses may lie so that you're more alert to the things that you should improve or could improve. At another level, the risk type compass can be used as an auditing tool, and it is used as an auditing tool in the sense that it's used with teams. So if you assess a team as a whole, there's a lot that you'll learn about the way that they would interact and operate. And all organizations are made up of teams, from the board at one end to project teams right down to the shop floor. And success always depends on the way the team performs. So team risk dynamics are going to influence team decisions. And the risk type compass team report is therefore an auditing tool. And it's been used at all of those sorts of levels, from the shop floor and right up to the board. And it highlights functional issues for the group. And it's used for review of the group and to, if you like, to audit them. But also it can be taken further than that, not just as an audit, but as a basis for discussion and self-awareness and self-knowledge within the team. Here's an example of a team composite, if you like. And you can see here that you've got a group of people in this particular team who are in the prudent, deliberate type, and you've got 3 in the adventurous group, and you've got 1 that's pretty carefree. Now that's, the dynamics there are going to be quite interesting. And two things to take note of, really. What is going to be the dominant? What is going to be the dominant force? Clearly, the prudent, deliberate route will be dominant. The adventurous people are a bit remote from those, so communication between those people likely to be somewhat more difficult, may even be antagonistic. And I think too with the carefree type the same. But when you're looking at this as an auditor, what you're also noticing is there's no wary type, there's no intense type, there's no spontaneous type. So what does that mean for the team? So I hope you can get an idea of how the dynamics of that team can be considered by using that model. And it's insightful for the team to look at that and to discuss how that actually plays out in reality on a day-to-day basis. The point is, it's not the name on the door that tells you what the person is like. So we're very used, I think, in business world of drawing flow diagrams and organizational charts, and we blithely will come up with the ideal model for whatever organization we're trying to create. But of course, it matters who is in the box. If you've got somebody in customer services who's irritable and bad-tempered, then that blows that function. If you've got someone in accounts who's careless and casual, that blows that function. If you've got someone in the supplies department who isn't attentive to detail, well, then that all goes wrong. So you can draw a beautiful diagram. The question is, who is it who is actually going to deliver on those things, and what is their risk type? Okay, it brings me really to the end of what I have to say this morning. I think at this point, just to remind you, this was our starting point with Exemplar Global. These are the ISO recommendations and or the points that they make about evaluating and controlling the risk associated with an auditing program. I think that's where risk type fits in. Applying risk management principles, methods, and techniques relevant to your own discipline or sector is another one. And what we have found over the period that we've been involved with all of this is that the regulatory authorities and the standards authorities are increasingly paying attention to the human factor, having spent a lot of time wrestling with the questions of how do you assess risk, how do you quantify it, and that will always go on. But as a complement to that, and as an interesting a new arrival, is the question about human factor risk, and this is what we've been addressing this morning. So thank you for your attention to that. I'll just, sorry, I'm just being reminded here. This is just to run through quickly. If you complete the assessment online, the key elements of the report that you will receive are as follows. So this obviously is the cover. All of the reports would have this description of the spectrum of risk types. So that's just a reminder. So when you're looking and discussing what your risk type is, what are other people like and how different are you from them? Then the core of the report is here, where you have your graphic and it places you within the graphic, and you then have a definition of that risk type. And you also have a definition of the opposite risk type, because clearly those are the things that this assessment suggests you are not. So what you are and what you are not on that part of the report. Then the report will give you an idea or an indication of how that plays out in terms of how you perceive risk, how alert you are to it, how you react to risk, how emotional, how unnerved by it you might be, how prone you are to risk taking as a person, and finally what all that means in terms of decision making. These are all points to help you to consider for yourself to what extent this reflects the reality. Another page in the report will identify particular positives and challenges associated with your particular risk type. And there are an equal number of every risk type. No personality characteristic doesn't have disadvantages, and they all have advantages. This page is an interesting one because it recognizes that there may be some of your responses that aren't quite in line with the overall conclusion of the assessment, i.e. you may be a particular risk type, but there may be other trends that have been emphatically stated in your assessment. So there's a number of bullet points on this page which will only show up where in some of the themes within the assessment you have scored at an extreme, either an extreme high or extreme low. So they are the most prominent characteristics that come out of the assessment, which you use to complement your understanding of risk type. And at the bottom of the page, because this is of interest in a lot of situations, there's an indication of your overall appetite for risk. So on that scale at the bottom, on a 0 to 100 scale, there's a marker to show where your assessment suggests you fall in terms of your overall risk tolerance or your overall risk appetite. And the red bar indicates the margin of error that we would expect within that assessment. So you can be very confident that your true position will be somewhere within that range. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Some questions coming through. We'll try and answer as many as we can. So first question we have is, do different types of auditing attract different risk types, Geoff?
Yeah, yes, I think that probably is the case. My example, if I can move on a little bit from the auditing specifics to a bit more general use, but we've done a lot of work with city traders. And city traders vary in their risk type, but they also vary in the type of trading that they're involved in. So whether they are a market maker or whether they're a day trader, for example, somebody who doesn't like to carry risk overnight, likes to settle their book before they go home at the end of the day, that sort of thing will be reflected. So yes, I mean, every risk type will have a role somewhere within auditing. Clearly, every auditing function has to have its cautious people, if you like, and there are advantages to that. But there will be some functions, for example, in selling the service, in actually engaging with other people in an engaging sort of way. Some of the more outgoing, more risk-taking people who take, I suppose, effectively are taking social risk, they can be quite interesting and enjoyable to work with. So having a front person who is one risk type would be perhaps in some circumstances an advantage. At the core, obviously, the point is you need to be aware of your risk type. As I suggested, I hope, early on, your risk type doesn't mean you can't do something. It just tells you what you're going to have to overcome or what you're going to have to deal with in order to do it. I hope that answers the question. But the risk type isn't an absolute straitjacket. It's something you have to be wary of because it'll be there all the time, and you'll continually want to or naturally will revert to that kind of disposition. But if you know that you are having to do something in a very detailed way, and you know that's a challenge for you, then you'll hopefully do it in a situation where you're not going to be interrupted, where you can take yourself away, where you can get your mind onto it. It's about how you understand yourself and how you manage yourself rather than whether it's necessarily a part of your qualification. But yes, auditing obviously does attract people of a particular risk type. That's what the research tells us.
Second question coming in, what can I expect to learn about myself in completing the assessment, and what if I don't agree?
Well, if you don't agree, you won't take any notice of it, I guess. I mean, what you ought to do is to be confident enough in yourself to accept the challenge and to allow you to question yourself about what you really like. We all have illusions about ourselves. We all think, probably that the way we come across to others is different than it actually is. We rationalize our behavior. This is all part of human psychology. So actually having an absolute self-awareness is a very difficult thing to do. I think, was it Plato or Aristotle who says, know thyself? Knowing yourself is not an easy thing to do. This is a tool to help you to know yourself. So if you're up for the challenge, I would go for it. yes, all right. You also have the option of saying, well, that's all rubbish. I knew what I was before, and that's how I am. Fine. That's your prerogative. I suggest, though, there's worth paying attention to. It's something that has demonstrated in all sorts of spheres its utility and its value. But I doubt you'll be that dismissive, actually. I think the more usual response is, my goodness, that's frighteningly accurate, to be honest. And we get that response quite often. Anyway, thanks for that question.
Okay, just another couple of questions we have time for. One of the points coming in, any examples, additional examples of how the tool has been employed in the marketplace?
It's being used in all sorts of ways. The team side of it has been very interesting, because there are a number of consultancies now that are offering, using risk type compass, that audit at the board level. And as an experience, because you can understand that. I mean, a board ought to be open to self-criticism. It ought to be open to that kind of process and openness and transparency. Obviously, very often they aren't. But it does reveal things in that context, because it explains why two people are always at each other's throat. And the reason is they're just very different risk types. We had a very interesting example of that, actually, which came out of Australia, in fact. But it was a domestic situation where somebody who was earning a very good amount of money, but it was all of it was performance based, so there's no basic salary, but earning very, very well, and wanting to move into a very large house, and having his wife being horrified and say, "Yeah, but you don't even have a regular salary. How can we do that?" And it was very interesting for both of them. I suggested they should both take the risk type. We were working with the guy, but not with his wife, and they did. And it kind of helped them to understand. So that is one area outside of regular auditing where it's been applied. Of course, in terms of wealth management, it's being applied, and there it's valued because of the depth of the conversation that you have with the client. And if you are after high net worth people to invest millions of pounds in your hedge fund, then you want them to see your professionalism and to have faith in you, and to go through this process, which clients themselves find it absolutely interesting rather than a chore, is a positive way to go. It's relationship building. I've spoken already about the market traders, and there's both sides of the Atlantic. There are people coaching traders. They're using the risk type compass to help them find their own strategy, the way that they can most effectively trade, or the kinds of trading, the area of trading which is best suited to their talents.
Just another couple of questions I'm keen to get answered. Somebody's asked about external factors that influence decision making. How does it all tie in?
The external factors affect us all the time. I mean, what happened to you on the way to work this morning? If you pass an accident on the road, you immediately start driving more cautiously for a little while, even if you're quite a reckless driver. So, but the point about all those external factors are they're not systematic. Things can just happen out of the blue, the headline that you've read, what happened within the family, how you lost something that you needed at the moment. All kinds of things unsettle you and influence your risk-taking and your decision-making. So that's clearly understood. And so it's not going to ensure that you always make decisions in a perfect way. But what it can do, though, is alert you to what is a persistent influence. None of these other influences are likely to be persistent and continuous. What comes from within you doesn't go away. It's always there. So it's a kind of a bias that you need to be alert to.
Okay, just last and a final question. Any additional questions we haven't answered, we'll follow up directly with you. Somebody's asking about the auditing profile of somebody who is working in the oil and gas industry, who's looking at it from the auditing of the safety processes. Again, could it be applied in that application?
Yeah, absolutely it can. And the thing about jobs that are themselves dangerous, and mining and drilling, of course, some of the most dangerous work you can imagine. I mean, just take what we've said about people being attracted to particular professions. Who do we think would be attracted to working on an oil rig in the North Sea? Which is, that's a local geographical reference from the UK. But how many people want to actually stand, even if it's in the Gulf of Mexico, on an oil rig out in the sea, where they're exposed to the weather and the storms, and quite frequent, unfortunately, helicopter crashes just ferrying people around. I think my answer would be those people are not cautious. So the people who are at the point of the dangerous part of the job are likely to be quite adventurous types. And that's an issue. It's also an issue for an auditor, because these are the kinds of people that you need to be dealing with and communicating with. And if the result of the audit is going to be of any benefit, then it's got to recognize these differences in the people who do the job. And health and safety it's really obviously a great application for the risk type compass. What the point we would make about that is, when you're working with people in those sort of frontline jobs, whether it's smelting aluminium or whether it's working on an oil rig or it's working down a diamond mine, you will never get good health and safety until you get people taking personal responsibility for their own safety. And they can't do that if you just lambast them for being bad boys every time they break a rule. You've got to get to the situation where they are aware of their own limitations and their own disposition. And we've found firsthand that this is something you can do. People who don't normally get involved in that kind of coaching, you can coach them. They are people on the shop floor will find, and do find in our personal experience, they find risk type illuminating and interesting, and they're pleased to think about it and consider it. We've done a major project recently in the smelting, in the aluminium industry, and the shop floor were great beneficiaries and great participants in that. And so if you want to get a risk culture, which is what you need at the end of the day, rules and regulations will only get you so far. A blind obedience will only get you so far. To get all the way, you need to get cooperation and input, and you need to have people to take responsibility, and they can't do that unless you give them an agenda. And if you can say to them, look, your issues are these, this and this and this and this, this is things you need to pay attention to in order to make sure you and your mates are safe. That's the way that risk type compasses can be extremely effective in that sort of context.
Okay, so additional questions, we will come back to people directly. Apologies, we've had quite a lot coming through. We've answered what we can. So that is this session closed. Again, if you want to get in touch with Ed at Exemplar, the details will have been on the this screen here, just in front of you, with email and phone details. And thank you to Geoff, thank you to Ed for joining.
Thanks for your attention. Did we record?